I'll kick us off. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Lisa Plaggemier, Chief Strategist at MediaPRO, where we build training that puts people first. I'll admit that I don't look anything like my profile picture anymore. Those of you who know me are probably saying, who is this person with this gray hair showing? COVID has liberated me from and my gray hair. So I'm still me and I need to get a new profile picture. I've decided during COVID that Botox is non-negotiable, but gray hair is totally in right now. So I hope if anybody else has done this during COVID, I hope you're rejoicing in it. Anyway, I have a background in marketing with Ford Motor Company and ADP, and I ran a training and awareness program at a $2 billion technology company. Perry?
Yeah, so Lance, thank you so much for having us here. My background is in running security awareness programs at a few large organizations, then also running the research capacity for security awareness at Gartner, and now I work for a vendor in the community. I also authored a book about security awareness a couple years ago that luckily it's been received very well by the community, so I'm happy to be here and happy to just be part of this community and this conference. Thanks so much. So as we get into it, why don't I kick us off and just talk a little bit about what's up with this weird name. So this is a really crappy title, but the topic itself is super, super important. And what we're here to talk about today is the importance of communicating and communicating well. And so this idea of the horse comes from the Trojan horse, of course, but it originated from the way that I think about problems that naturally occur in security awareness. And so I typically have this mantra where I talk about there are three realities of security awareness. Number one is just because somebody is aware doesn't mean that they care. Number two is if we try to work against human nature, we will fail every single time. And number three is what somebody does is way more important than what they know, because, and I'll say it as bluntly as I can, what somebody knows has never stopped a breach. It's what somebody does in the moment. You can know all the right things and still do the wrong thing by being tricked into it or having a bad habit or something else. Or you could not know anything and still accidentally do the right thing and just stumble into it. And so those are the ways that I think about it. I'm also a big fan, like Lance and others here, of the work of BJ Fogg. And he talks about the fact that behavior happens when three things come together at the same time: motivation, ability, and a prompt to do the behavior. And of those three things, the thing that's the hardest to control is motivation. And so BJ typically says, we'll save motivation to last because it's so individual, but part of our mandate is to communicate. And so to communicate, we are trying to affect motivation. And so when it comes to affecting motivation, where we have to draw our cues from are marketers and storytellers, and figuring out ways to implant ideas in somebody's mind that will grow and have the result that we want. That's where I get to these 4 Trojan horses of emotion and sound and story and words and visuals and all of those kind of things, because we're all about trying to implant something that will bring fruit later on. So with that, why don't we talk a little bit about emotion? Lisa, why don't you take over here for a second?
Yeah, so if you've heard me speak before, you know this is one of my all-time favorite quotes from Seth Godin, who's a marketing guru who's got a great website out there and blog and everything. People are irrational and they usually make decisions that have nothing to do with facts. And yet we spend most of our time improving our facts and very little concern with the rest. So when we're developing training and awareness materials, we spend a lot of attention to having all of our facts straight, giving everybody the best possible security advice. We go through multiple reviews. But the reality is that people literally make 90% of their decisions in their unconscious mind. So we're not completely rational, no matter how much we think we're like Mr. Spock, you know, we're not, we're emotional beings. And if we want to reach that, if people are making 90% of their decisions in their unconscious minds, the way that we reach the unconscious mind was through emotion. So this is something called Plutchik's Wheel of Emotion. Robert Plutchik was a psychologist that developed this. And he proposes this idea that there are 8 basic emotions: joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, anticipation, anger, and disgust. And each primary emotion also has a polar opposite, which is pretty obvious. Joy is the opposite of sadness, etc. Further, all of these emotions are actually combinations of basic emotions. So if you think about it like the color wheel, you have primary emotion, primary colors, and you combine those to get other emotions. So for example, joy and trust together are love, or delight is the equivalent of joy and surprise. So there's also this idea of intensity of emotion in this kind of continuum. And I pick these 3 that are on this slide now because I think they're the best examples for us in security awareness. Trust is related to acceptance and admiration. We had a problem when I was running a program with people not trusting the security team. They thought we were the Department of No, we're difficult to work with, all that stuff. And so we ran a campaign that featured different individuals in the department. So many of them had backgrounds in serving the country or law enforcement, or they were fascinating individuals. But as you know, a lot of security people don't come out from behind their screens. A lot of guys in the SOC feel more comfortable just staying in the SOC or the CSIRT all day. And so we humanized them, and we showed that they were people that you can admire. And that really helps with the trust factor. Fear, on the other hand, is related to timidity and terror. I really don't like using fear in training and awareness. I think timidity is kind of the enemy of education, that education should be empowering. And timidity is the opposite of feeling empowered. And we want people to feel empowered and engaged. Anticipation is related to interest and vigilance. And I think that's our goal. We want to inspire people to be vigilant. So I think we need to leverage more anticipation to get people interested and keep them interested and eventually get them to the point where they act with vigilance. There's another one on here that I didn't put up the slide, but if you look toward the top in the yellow and the orange section, you'll see optimism and interest and serenity. And there's a brilliant creative mind I've been working with since the time of the Edna videos and the Pavel videos and all that great stuff. He's a creative director out in Portland. And I've been working with him lately at MediaPRO, and he said to me a couple of months ago, as we were working on some new training, he said, Lisa, 5 or 6 years ago, I started working with you. I really used to worry about this stuff. And I started using a password manager and changing a few other things. And he says, I really have peace of mind. I don't worry about this stuff anymore. This stuff doesn't scare me. And I think that really hit me. I had to sleep on that for a night, because I think what occurred to me is that we could be selling more optimism and peace of mind, right? We talk a lot about the fear, the bad things that can happen if you don't exhibit certain behaviors, don't use a password manager, whatever it is. We talk a lot about what can go wrong, but we don't, in this industry, we don't do enough to talk about the peace of mind that you'll have when things go well, right? When you do these few simple things, you can have peace of mind. So we rely a little bit too heavily, I think, on fear. If you want to go to the next slide, Perry. So we wanted to have a little discussion. Perry, you're on mute still. A little discussion about fear and humor and all those things. I think humor is really good for getting people's attention and for culture change. I've used it to, have content at CDK that went viral in the organization. It kind of helps you rebrand the security organization as people that are fun and approachable. But Perry, you have some other research and some other
Yeah. I mean, so I think when we talk about emotion in general, emotion is really, really powerful. And I like your comments about trying to reframe a lot of these fear conversations to optimism conversations, because I used to tell people that, hey, if you want to sell to a security organization, you tell the CISO that you're going to help that person sleep better at night. So it's the alleviation of the bad thing that you're wanting. So what is the optimism of the removal of this oppressive feeling that may happen? But I think as an awareness industry, that we've kind of slid over into thinking that funny is kind of the be all end all of awareness. and it is and it isn't. So you hit on exactly the right thing. One is it opens up a relationship. It makes us kind of cool and approachable and an organization that people want to speak to. What humor, I think, doesn't do as well is actually embed something in somebody's mind, because at all times we're working with an emotional baseline. And most of us kind of live in this emotional baseline, and then we blip above it or below it, several times a day. The thing that we don't realize is that we blip above it kind of quite a bit. Anytime we have a conversation with somebody and we laugh, we actually laugh a lot every day. And we don't necessarily remember why or what the punchline or the reason was. We just remember the good feeling. Now, biologically and evolutionarily, we remember the reasons why we dip below an emotional baseline. There's a lot of reasons that happens. And so when we tell stories and when we use emotion in stories, I think it is really important to talk about some of the things that can go wrong, because we want that empathy to kick in. And where empathy kicks in, that's where we can start to really remember things in a different way and lodge ideas in a different way. Lisa, do you have some comments there?
Yeah, I think one of the other things I've noticed, I went to a presentation, or attended a virtual presentation with a UX UI organization that I'm in, like a meetup group here in Austin. And we had a speaker that was fantastic, and he was talking about the the emotional price right now of asking for somebody's attention or asking for behavior. It was all about UX and UI design during COVID. And he had this idea of emotional ROI. So if we're asking for somebody's attention, there's a trade-off there. It's a transaction. And particularly right now, when people are super stressed out, we need to be leaning into the positive. We need to be leaning into empowerment. We need to the world is a crazy place right now with social issues and an election that doesn't seem to end. And, least of all, a global pandemic. It's just, you couldn't have dreamt anything, sort of all this happening at once in our country. It would have been hard to have or in the world, it would have been hard to have made this up. But I don't think people need one more thing to be afraid of right now. So I think when it comes to, especially the imagery we use, pictures of hackers and hoodies. One of my favorites is the hand reaching through the screen at you. I think that's tone deaf for our current times.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we've talked about a lot as a community over the past few years, is that the imagery needs an update, because it is relying on a lot of fear or a lot of cliche, like locks and fingerprints and all of that. But we're going to talk about why that's the case, and why that people still do that, even though it's a little bit lazy. And they do it because it works. It unlocks a lot. So as we get into the concept of visuals, the way that I think about it is that images really are a compression algorithm for the mind. Is within a very short amount of time, the time that it takes light to hit your retina, your brain is already interpreting that thing much more quickly than as we're starting to read words and sentences and paragraphs and so on. So images are really, really powerful. They can unlock and evoke emotion. They can become part of a larger story. They can become very suggestive of different things. And so if you're not using compelling imagery in your programs, you're leaving a lot on the table. If you're just handing people policies, you're leaving a lot on the table, because you have this really, really powerful language that you can be using, including the way that you employ even just color in that.
Yeah, so color clearly has meaning. I found this nifty graphic online from a design company that kind of outlines the emotions, the meanings behind different colors, right? Yellow is optimism, orange is a very friendly color, and so on. And I thought this was a neat graphic because it does a really good job of lining up all the logos of companies that we all know. And you can kind of see how their brands utilize these emotions through these colors, and we feel a certain way about some of these companies. When you see branding guidelines or a brand book, which a lot of your companies have. I'm sure your corporate communications has thrown the branding book at you here and there in your awareness program. You'll see a color palette. And one of the points I want to make here is about the use of really bright, intense colors like the colors on this emotion guide. So when you look at that color palette, there's going to be things that your marketing people have decided are your main colors. And then there's things that are accent colors. And probably one of the biggest faux pas that I see is people being too heavy-handed with those accent colors. So if you think about, close your eyes and think about a PowerPoint slide or a graphic that has maybe one yellow dot or one word in yellow or something. When you look at that, your eye knows exactly where to go. If there were 20 yellow dots on that on that black background, your eye doesn't know where to go. It's too confusing. It's overwhelming. So my advice is to be super, super sparing with those accent colors. Otherwise, they're no longer accent colors, and they fail in trying to get somebody's attention. Yeah, you can actually also search on colors on stock photo sites, and you'll see images that convey the emotion that are in the color that you're searching on.
Yeah, I think that that's a really powerful thing. Again, if we're talking about things that people leave on the table, is a lot of people say, well, I'm not a graphic designer, so I'll just kind of, spend 5 or 10 minutes and live with the best that I can find in that. But really, all you have to do is look at good examples of what the emotion you're trying to convey or the scene that you're trying to paint. So if you're talking about, let's say, security and family and safety, you can just pop those things into Getty Images or Adobe Stock or something else, and you can find some great examples of it. And then look at the colors that are there. I can almost guarantee that if you're talking about security and safety and family, you're going to be seeing a lot of green because that's life and fertility and optimism. So as we move into that optimism piece, you'll see the oranges and the yellows start to come in. And you may even see like families and wheat fields, things that almost never happen in real life, but they're there because it unlocks all that emotion and all that rich history that we have with imagery that's just like that. I want to get into some of the power of logos and brands just to talk about imagery, because this is the language that we think in so much. So which do you more immediately respond to? These, which are words, Facebook, Coca-Cola, YouTube, Taco Bell, or which evokes more emotion? Yeah, I mean, I think that this is self-evident. Now, what happens, I talked about images or compression algorithm for the mind. Anytime you see something like this, your mind unlocks all your history, all your preconceived notions, good or bad, about each one of these companies, the particular memories you have associated with those, good or bad, anything that you know about that organization. So all that richness comes forward just with the evocation of that single image. Oh, and look at this. I can even reduce that and be really, really reductive with that. Get rid of the names and still keep all of that power. So what are you doing with branding with your security awareness program? Are you unlocking some of that? And this, by the way, this is the heart of the issue that Lisa mentioned when it talks about hackers and hoodies and fingerprints and locks and all that, is all of this has already been built into the subconscious of society right now, is that these are the logos that are associated with security. So if we want to change that, we have to start now, and we have to understand all the science behind it, and then build compelling imagery that will start to foster a next generation. This isn't a 6-month or a 1-year type of game. If we want to really change this, we have to change this for the long haul, and we have to be super intentional about it and build the new brand now. So
yeah, I was actually,
I know you've got some comments here on how words get used with this.
Yeah, so Perry talked about logos. There's also word marks, which are just made up of typography and maybe a particular color, and that's what you're looking at on the screen right now. And typography, in addition to color, also carries meaning. So if you look at, for example, progressive, it's literally leaning forward, right? Which is the definition of being progressive, and it shows a lot of movement and activity. Porsche is very stylized, just like their cars. They're known for their design, right? Time in the bottom left there looks very authoritative. The New York Times, also at the bottom next to time, old-fashioned integrity, right? IBM looks super digital, like it came off an old printer. Facebook, I think, is trying to look friendly with the all lowercase. I'm not quite sure it's living up to its brand promise all the time. Volvo almost looks like it could be for a bank. It's, you know, that blue is usually a color of security, and they're known for their safety, being, you know, some of the safest vehicles on the road. So they've chosen blue, and then that all capital typeface there really makes them look solid and secure. Some of us are allowed to go out and make our own logos for our security programs, and some of us aren't. There's a lot of free tools out there. If you just Google like free logo maker or free word mark maker, you'll find tools out there if you don't have the help of a graphic arts department. But literally, if you think about the meaning of the colors, the meaning of the typography, that'll help you, even if you're not a graphic artist. That goes a long way to getting to something that will convey exactly what it is you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're budget challenged, Fiverr.com can be your friend if you're budget challenged.
Yeah.
Challenged. And so what I think we need to do is probably speed up a little bit. We've only got about 9 minutes left. And there's a couple things that we can hit on really quick. These are going to be really quick flashes. So I want to start with an experiment and just to hammer this point home, which is easier for you to process. Something like this. I'm not even going to read it to you. You just try to make it through it. And then now feel the difference here. Immediately, you get all the context. It probably took you 20 seconds to read just those 3 or 4 sentences that are there. And now you get all that nuance and more. So this is the point that I make where I say, if we're just throwing policy at people or throwing newsletters at people, then we're not necessarily having the impact that we can have. We can unlock a lot more. And we're going to walk through some of the ways that we've seen image become the language of the mind in popular culture.
Yeah, we'll breeze through this. So this was just, I thought this was entertaining. This is what I got when I typed fear into Getty Images. This is the results I got. And I think it was really interesting that the cats and the dog that were in there. But, you know, we've preached a lot today about getting out of that comfort zone and that usual branding of hackers and hoodies and all that good stuff. So let's look at the what's out in popular media. Some of you might remember this ad from 2017. It shows a protest going on, and Kendall Jenner approaches a police officer with a Pepsi, and somehow that magically solves world peace. So this was pulled one day after its launch. And this is why. It was tone deaf. So on the left, you see Aisha Evans, who was participating in a protest in Baton Rouge a year previously and was arrested. And so this ad was just seen as being tone deaf. And I've used that phrase a couple times, but I think that's really, really important now during COVID, trying to run your awareness program. We can't be tone deaf. We have to be realistic about people's emotional load. And so this might be a better time to use optimism and do something lighthearted or use storytelling. So this is an ad from 2010. Perry's going to play it, so I'll be quiet for a minute. It's only 30 seconds.
Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back at your man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady-scented body wash and switched to Old Spice, he could smell like he's me. Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a boat with the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have it. It's an oyster with 2 tickets to that thing you love. Look again. The tickets are now diamonds. Anything is possible when your man smells like Old Spice and not a lady. I'm on a horse.
So this was incredibly successful. It was called The Perfect Little Movie because it really is. It's only 31 seconds. This led to Old Spice having, Old Spice was a brand from Procter & Gamble with one.
Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back.
it increased sales 125%. Twitter followers went up 2,700%. They got 5.9 million YouTube views on the first day alone. So why was this effective? So it is a little tiny movie. It crams in a whole bunch into 30 seconds. It pokes fun at all the cliches. We're all familiar with the cliched ads for cologne and perfume and, you know, the shirtless man on a horse and diamonds and all these cliched things. It pokes fun at all that stuff. It also delivers some fact, right? It gets your attention with the emotion, the humor, but then the fact is, like, the reality, the research that the ad agency did showed that men were using women's body wash, and that's what they were that was the fact that they were delivering, is if you don't want your man to smell like you, then you should probably buy him this, because most women purchase body wash for men. That was another fact that they used. Anyway, this next print ad that you're looking at now is an example of how this can go all wrong. This is a huge advertising fail. They took a great campaign and just went too far with it, and it's super convoluted. And I would argue on the next slide, we see the security awareness equivalent of a convoluted ad, right? It's too information dense. There's too much copy. There's no room for your eye to breathe. There's also no romance and no intrigue. We're not, you know, don't feed people lunch, make them hungry. The next is another example, same thing. Images are tiny, too information dense, no white space. But if you look at this next ad, it's super clever, ton of white space. You don't even need that copy at the bottom because the image itself just portrays everything you need right there. On the next one, this is super confusing. I had to look at this for a few minutes before I even understood what it's about. It's a mortgage ad. It's saying that if you don't worry about your mortgage, you'll have more time to play dominoes. And to me, this was, our brains crave some obscurity, but when things are too obscure, it's too hard to decipher. We actually look away. The next one is something that's obscure, but super clever, and it only takes your brain a second to figure it out. So this was really timely. This was done during the president's the Kofafi typo tweet. This is Ikea having a little fun with that and coffee tables. And then this is gorgeous to me. It's the two arms, outstretched arms, handing over a bottle of soda. Doesn't even show the product name. Perry, why don't we skip talking about sound and wrap things up? Go straight to storytelling.
I mean, the only thing that I'll say there is if you're not thinking about sound design in the way that you do executive videos and everything else, you're not getting the impact that you need. But sound gets wrapped up into everything else. So you should pay as much attention to sound as you do the video itself, because it will tell the story for you where you can lack, or it can build the pace for you where there's lacking of pace. But let's get on to the concept of story and land there, because I know we only have about 2 minutes left, and Lance will take us out in a second. So Lisa, you've got a story that you just recently did, right?
Yeah, so I found this quote that I really like. Instead of telling a story about how great your brand is, how great your security awareness, your security advice is, try telling a story that shows you completely understand and empathize with your customer, with your employees and their life. If you want to Google it later, there's a whole bunch of information on story and brain science. But so we actually started a series that we're doing for free. We're just putting them out there on social, called Mom Don't Click That. And the idea here is having empathy and just some conversation around our elderly relatives that we're trying to solve the problem of getting awareness out there to people like us who have aging parents. So this is Kelvin Coleman, the executive director of the NCSA, in the bottom right, and then there's a moderator on the top right. And that's his dad telling the story of how his Facebook account was taken over. And so it's a little bit humorous, but it's really just him telling the story, and you empathize so much with him as the victim. The inspiration for this for me was Somebody Feed Phil. If you've seen that show, at the very end, he FaceTimes with his aging parents, and it's cute and it's funny. But we really have created a sense of empathy with this, and it's a great little story. It's like 4 or 5 minutes. I'm looking for volunteers. If you'd like to do one with your aging relative, just hit me up on LinkedIn. We're doing these just to put out on social and just try and tell these stories in a very disarming way that takes away the stigma. I think that generation feels a bit of a stigma when they've been victimized, And it can also be a success story of a near miss scam.
Yeah.
But try to find a way to lean into storytelling as much as you can. It really, especially the empathy part for during COVID and everything, and how people are emotionally stressed, that empathy and sense of community you can really leverage that through telling people stories.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to close on, because it really wraps up a lot of what we talked about. Storytelling leads to empathy, and there's brain science behind that for sure. Empathy unlocks emotion in positive ways, so we can deal with hard things like negative emotion and fear, but we can provide the optimism on the other side of that. You've got great visuals, especially here with somebody that's older, that's telling their story, that's evoking. There's probably laughter even involved with that too, as they recall some parts of this, so they get both sides of that. And even the sound of somebody's voice when they've been personally affected by something. And they're looking at both the negative sides and the positive sides. There's a lot that comes into that. So this is, story itself, when told well, when filmed well, and when designed well, is the ultimate thing that will become the Trojan horse, because it wraps everything up, pulls it together. And with that, I know that we need to yield the floor over to Lance. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining me for this. And Lance, thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks, Perry. It was great working on this with you. And thank you, Lance. And hi to everybody. Sorry we can't see each other in person this year.